This month on Tampa Bay Video Citizen, we look at first responders' mental health and why their suicide rates are higher than the national average, and we offer solutions. This month on Tampa Bay Video Citizen. Tampa Bay Video Citizen would like to thank the following sponsors for their generous support. Papa Ron's Candles. Hi, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Glenn Ryan. You see and sometimes interact with these people every day while you're going about your lives. These are your firefighters, police, emergency medical technicians, and sometimes search and rescue. These are better known as first responders. These are the people that you come in contact with when you are in need of emergency services. Now, the actual definition of a first responder, according to Title VI, Domestic Security of the U.S. Code, is federal, state, and governmental and non-governmental emergency public safety, fire or law enforcement, emergency response, emergency medical, including hospital emergency facilities, and related personnel, agencies, and authorities. These men and women willingly put their lives on the line to protect and help. But the work that they do puts a great amount of stress on them constantly. Firefighting and police has the inherent ability to subject members to reoccurring emotionally and physically painful traumatic experiences daily. But what is the definition of a traumatic event? The American Psychological Association in 2000 defined a critical incident in two parts. The first part was that a person had to experience, witness, or confront an event that involves actual or threatened death or serious injury or a threat to physical integrity of self or others. And the second part was they must experience intense fear, horror, or helplessness. Now that definition is under debate because this does not address life events that may adversely affect a person, such as coming home and finding your spouse has run off and is not coming back, or losing your job and there are no prospects on the horizon and you have a family to support. But that does not change the fact that first responders are more likely to encounter potential critical events on a regular basis than the average citizen. In a normal career, police officers witness on average 188 critical events. In one study of 400 police officers, 10% reported that they had killed or seriously injured someone within the first 3 years of their career. This constant exposure of these type of events accumulate until it takes its toll. According to one study, it was found that EMS workers had a suicide rate 10 times greater than the national average. Police and firefighters were more likely to die by suicide than in the line of duty. This is not a simple cause and effect phenomenon, and it cannot be blamed on just a person unable to take the pressures of the job. This issue is caused by a buildup of daily exposures to stressful occurrences until some incident finally triggers the person. There are things that happen to all people physiologically when stress overwhelms you, and it's important for you to know what happens to you when you have a stressful event. Every time you become involved in a stressful situation, your body goes into a mode that you are not aware of. Your body spills out chemicals that want to try to help you whether you realize it or not. Some of these hormones can be detrimental to you though. So let's take a brief look at what your body does when it goes through stress. Keep in mind, while everyone reacts to certain stressful situations differently, how your body reacts is uniquely the same. The process starts in the center portion of your brain called the hypothalamus. Once your stress reaches a certain threshold, the hypothalamus secretes a hormone called corticotropin-releasing hormone, or CRH. This hormone takes a short walk through the bloodstream down to the pituitary gland, which is located just below the hypothalamus. It is here that the CRH hormone wakes up the pituitary gland and gets it to secrete a hormone called adrenocorticotropic hormone, better known as ACTH. Now the ACTH takes a longer walk through your bloodstream down to your kidneys. On top of both of your kidneys rests a gland known as your adrenal glands. The ACTH wakes up these adrenals and gets it to start secreting glucocorticoids, to include cortisol. Now 90% of your cortisol becomes bound to proteins in your blood, but 10% remains free. This is important because under normal conditions, it is this 10% that goes back up to the hypothalamus and gets it to turn off the CRH secretion. Normally, cortisol acts to assist the body in several things. It manages how your body uses carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. It tries to keep inflammation down. It regulates your blood pressure. It increases your blood sugar to help you boost your energy. It controls your sleep-wake cycle. It boosts your energy so you can handle stress and then restores balance afterward through the CRH shutoff cycle, as I had mentioned earlier. Now, over a period of time, due to consistent and repeated stressful incidences, this protective mechanism deteriorates. This causes the hypothalamus to lose its ability to turn off cortisol production, causing the individual to walk around with increased levels of cortisol. Elevated cortisol levels have been associated with poor overall cognitive functioning. Examples can include changes in mood or behavior, poor episodic memory, poor executive functioning causing the person to struggle with tasks like planning, problem solving, organization, and time management. Processing speed, where some determined tasks will be more difficult than others, like reading, doing math, listening and taking notes, or holding conversations. Depression, sleep disturbances, which shows up most commonly as insomnia, and causes changes in a person's metabolism, which can put them at risk for higher cardiovascular risk factors, such as obesity. Now, there are things that you can do as an individual that can help you battle the effects of cortisol. One is to get the right amount of sleep. Now, tips that can help you rest can include: first, exercise, being active during waking hours, and you keep a regular bedtime as much as possible. No caffeine at night. Limiting exposure to bright light at night. So turn off the computer screens and wind down for several minutes before bedtime. Limit distractions before bed. Limit interruptions by using white noise, earplugs, silencing your phone, and avoiding fluids right before bed. Take naps. If shift work cuts into your sleep hours, then napping can reduce sleepiness and prevent a sleep deficit. Now, exercise, but not too much. Depending on the intensity of your exercise, it can actually increase or decrease your cortisol, depending on how intense your exercise is. Another thing you can do is to learn to recognize stressful thinking. Train yourself to be aware of your thoughts, breathing, heart rates, and other signs of tension will help you recognize stress when it begins. And this goes into the next point. Learn to relax. Deep breathing is a simple technique for stress reduction that can be used anywhere. Massage therapy can also reduce cortisol levels, and relaxing music can also decrease it. Have fun. A positive disposition is associated with lower cortisol levels, as well as lower blood pressure, a healthy heart rate, and a strong immune system. Maintain healthy relationships. Friends and family are a source of great happiness in life, as well as great stress. Support from loved ones, though, can help reduce the cortisol in the face of stress. Take care of a pet. Several studies have shown that interacting with animal companions reduces stress and lower cortisol levels. Be kind to yourself. Feelings of shame, guilt, or inadequacy can lead to negative thinking, increase stress, and elevate your cortisol. Tend to your spirituality. For those with spiritual inclinations, developing faith and participating in prayer can help control cortisol. Whether you are spiritual or not, performing acts of kindness can also improve your cortisol levels. Eat healthy foods. Sugar intake is one of the classic triggers for cortisol release. Regular high sugar intakes may keep your levels elevated. And finally, take certain supplements. Fish oil and ashwagandha has been known to reduce cortisol. There are different ways that a first responder's problems can manifest itself in behavioral ways. Some are subtle and some are not so subtle. Here are a few warning signs for you to look out for. Some of the warning signs that you may see include alcohol and substance abuse. In one study, alcohol was found in 85% of the police officers' suicide. Signs of an alcohol problem can include experiencing temporary blackouts or short-term memory loss. Binge drinking. In one study of female firefighters, it showed a 40% rate of binge drinking, while out of that 40%, 16.5% screened positive for problem drinking behaviors. Making excuses for drinking, such as to deal with stress, to relax, or to feel normal. Exhibiting signs of irritability or extreme mood swings. Choosing drinking over other responsibility and obligations. Becoming isolated and distanced from friends and family members. Drinking alone or in secrecy. Feeling hungover when you're not drinking. And changing your appearance and the group of acquaintances that you normally hang out with. There's a short questionnaire known as CAGE, and it helps identify people with problem drinking habits. And the questions are these. Have you ever felt you should cut down on your drinking? Have people annoyed you by criticizing about your drinking? Have you ever felt bad or guilty about your drinking? And have you ever had a drink first thing in the morning to steady your nerves or get over a hangover? If you answered yes to 2 or more of those questions on the CAGE questionnaires, it is recommended that you seek professional help. Mental health conditions. One study showed a depression rate among firefighters of 11% when compared to the general population, which was 6.7. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is strongly linked to suicidal risk, suicidal ideation, and past attempts. One team of researchers estimated PTSD to be around 35% in police officers. Diminished work capacity. Researchers have found that first responders with PTSD show performance deficits on complex cognitive tasks. This dovetails on our earlier discussion of how increased and persistent high levels of cortisol can affect your ability in decision making. These could affect processes like assessing risk, performing multi-step responses in an emergency, or paying attention to cognitive stimuli. Suicidal ideation or attempts. Re-experiencing symptoms is instrumental in acquiring the capability for suicide. In a study of 1,000 firefighters, 46.8 reported thinking about or imagining suicide at least one time in their career. There are 3 factors that need to be considered when discussing the relationship of PTSD and suicide. First, suicidal ideation may develop in individuals that suffer traumatic experiences which exacerbates an underlying mental disorder such as depression. Recurrent exposure to painful or fear-producing situation may also exacerbate suicidal ideation. And then there are concerns that the stress in recalling and reprocessing an index trauma on an actively suicidal patient may increase their suicidality, making therapy for these people challenging. One of our guests tonight is retired Chief Jeff Dill from the Firefighters Behavioral Health Alliance, and we thank him for taking the time out of his busy schedule to come and talk to us on our program. Now, Jeff Dill is a CEO of the Firefighters Behavioral Alliance, a retired captain at the Palatine Rural Fire Protection District in Inverness, Illinois. He formed this nonprofit organization in 2011 to help firefighters and EMT deal with the issue of mental health and suicide. In some departments, you have firefighters working alongside EMTs, and in other departments, you have firefighters doing the exact same duties as EMTs. So some departments have people with The same job description, both EMT and firefighter, and there are some departments that have a separated job description of a firefighter and then an EMT. For purposes of our program, is that when we talk about firefighters, we are talking about firefighters and EMT both in the same boat. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Chief Jeff Dill. What is the Firefighters Behavioral Health Alliance?
I am a retired fire captain from the northwest suburbs of Chicago, and in 2010 I founded Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance, and to this day we are still the only organization in the United States that tracks all fire, meaning military firefighters, wildland, career, volunteer, as well as EMS members and dispatch suicides. And the way we track and validate them is we get confidential reports that come in off our webpage, or because a lot of people know me nowadays, or chiefs will call me. And I read the emails that come in. I have no idea where they come from. They're confidential. They're wiped away. So I then contact the fire or EMS chief. And to date, we have validated almost 1,500 of these tragic events. And I have personally spoken to about 1,450 chiefs or family members that have called us to validate and collect the data. And in that data, we collect state, ages, ranks, gender, methods, reasons, names, departments, and I'm sure we'll go through all that. But we also, we have 7 different workshops, so I travel across the United States and Canada. It won't be this year because of the virus, but previous 5 or 6 years, I've been averaging over 100,000 air or road miles. And we've never solicited for one workshop. We're just people hear about us, they see us speak at conferences, and they bring us in. And then we have a couple other things FBHA does. We have a scholarship program for children of fire and EMS that died by suicide. And our most endearing to my wife and I, Karen, is our annual weekend retreat called Those Left Behind. And family survivors from across the United States come together and they bond and they network. Unfortunately, due to the virus, we had to cancel it for this year. It was actually supposed to be this week in the Gulf Shores of Alabama. So that's just a little of something what FBHA does.
What have you found when dealing with the issues of mental health in firefighters?
Well, it's interesting because, being at 26 years in the fire service, I started as a volunteer and then went career. When I was a battalion chief, I went back and got my master's degree and became a licensed counselor. So I kind of understand both sides of the wall. And one of the biggest things that we really talk about is cultural brainwashing. The society is also culturally brainwashed into believing, what firefighters and EMS, what they do. So now when you put this uniform on and you're expected to act in those ways, and who expects that? Well, our brothers and sisters we work with, the communities we serve, plus the history of the EMS and fire service. And so it's very difficult for us to ask for help when we're challenged in our personal, professional lives. And so this has been one of the biggest issues that I have found, both being in the fire service as well as traveling and seeing thousands and thousands of my brothers and sisters, is that they're held to expectations and they don't want to let anyone down, including themselves. And they don't want to appear weak to others. So this is one thing that we've really started to highlight in the last 4 or 5 years. And we do that through a term we call doing an internal size up. And what that means is that we need to ask ourselves on a daily basis, why am I acting this way? Why am I feeling this way? And then one of the best things that we can do is to listen to others because they see us a lot better than we will ever see ourselves.
Are you seeing any correlation with mental health issues if the firefighter is a veteran?
Well, we see a big correlation with PTSD in the veterans. Most people, and we'll look at the data, but most people believe that PTSD is the number one reason why my brothers and sisters in the EMS and fire world are taking their lives. And in reality, it's not. But for military, it is a very high percentage because of the active duty. And this is something that we really need to look at in the fire and EMS world, is that when they come back from duty, active duty, what do we do with them? And it's been our recommendation organization, because we consult with a lot of fire departments on creating behavioral health programs, it's been our belief that you put them on days and you assign someone to them, and they run the calls with that person just to see what their reactions are, see if they're a little gun shy, see if they're loud noises or a real bad scene is a struggle for them. Meanwhile, they're also going to counseling through either the VA, a military counselor, as well as a counselor who understands the fire EMS service. And so all these things, and it's not a punishment. It's one of, hey, we want to take care of you, not only for the career, but for the rest of your life. And so when we see these military coming back, since 2014, we now have had 32 of our brothers and sisters that have taken their lives that are returning from active duty.
So let's take a look at those slides, and if you could provide an explanation as to what we're seeing.
And understand, FBHA only estimates about a 65% reporting at this time. Where we miss out, we feel, is EMS and volunteer side. So. Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. The 1,141 were active fire EMS, 260 retirees. What is disturbing about the retirees, it's very difficult because a lot of them, they move out of town and lose connection with their departments. But out of those 260, 37 took their lives within the first week of retirement. And we found that very disturbing. Of course, all of the numbers are very disturbing. And so we recently, we interviewed recently 125 retirees. And we found the top 3 issues that they were dealing with, and that was loss of identity, loss of belonging, and lack of purpose. And one of the things that really was ironic was this was done across the United States. When I was visiting, I'd hear retirees or see retirees. And one of their first thoughts is that, you know what, we thought our life was over with. And the average age of this survey was 54.7 years old. You know, they have 25, 30 years left to live. And so departments really need to be very proactive in trying to help out those that are approaching retirement, instead of just giving them a party and an axe on a board. We need to try to help them, and things like, how do we get them? Do they want to go back to school? When they retire, do we extend counseling benefits or peer support or chaplain visits to our retirees? And then as you see, you see disability. That's not how they expected their careers to end. Resignations, out of those 53, 40 were either you're fired or you resign. And out of those 40, 11, the day after they resigned, took their lives. So we need to, watch out for that aspect as well. Well, what we noticed with our data is there's no discrimination. It doesn't matter if you're career or volunteer, fire, EMS, although the numbers are higher for firefighters, but it doesn't care if you're career, like it's a career volunteer, city, suburban, rural, male, female, ages, ranks. And when we look at the ages, we see that, between the 17 and 30 time frame ages, 322, then 363, 372, 266. Our youngest was a 17-year-old volunteer, and our oldest was a 97 years old retiree. And he left a detailed note. His grandson attended one of our workshops and went home, told his dad, and his dad called me and read me the note that his father left for him. And so it's one of those things where demons they carried for so long into retirement. But like you said, there is no discrimination on the ages. I get that question a lot. Is it more the older, because we didn't talk about behavioral health, and then that could be a possibility. I don't know, because when I started doing our workshops, our first workshops ever were in 2011 for the Philadelphia Fire Department, and I walked into that first workshop of about 100 Philly firefighters and said, we'll be talking about PTSD and suicide awareness. You thought I had leprosy. So we don't talk about those things, and we didn't. But yet when we look now is how much we're really discussing these past, I would say within the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a greater increase. But you can see the ages, there's not a lot of discrimination in there.
Well, that's what struck me about the data, because if you look at the ages, the higher amount of suicides that you see are in the between the 17 and the 50-year-old group. Yet these are the ones that are prevalent to killing themselves are retired. Now, are these retired with disabilities? Is this why the age disparity is there, or what is it?
Well, when we look at the 266, the 51 to 60, when we start looking at that aspect, that's where we start seeing some of the retirees. But also understand, as I stated in our previous chart, there's a lot of retirees that I'm sure that we miss because they just disconnect. They move across the country, and no one knows, where they are and who they are. So these are, the active as well as the retirees within these numbers that you see on this screen. Well, it's and you can see and there's some very disturbing ones on there, and I apologize to anyone who might be watching that might have lost a loved one to suicide. But it's important that we at FBHA understand these methods and try to use it as prevention tool to stop my brothers and sisters from struggling and taking their lives. And as you see, society wise, firearms is for males in society is number one, and for females in society is overdosing. But when we look at our data and we see that 865 were firearms, that goes for both male and females. It was the number one. And it's perplexing. It makes you want to ask a lot of questions when you look at our data. For me, I wonder, is it because of the female EMS and female firefighters? Do they fall prey to the cultural brainwashing? Meaning they go on to calls and they see that they're 99.99% successful, those who take their lives through firearms. And is it the cultural brainwashing that they have to act a certain way because it's a male-dominant career, that not only do they have to act in that aspect to be accepted, do they then take their lives in that same manner? So these are the things that, we look at the data and then you wonder. I mean, you look down that list. I mean, you look at some of them, they're just horrific. We had one firefighter who held a stick of dynamite in his mouth. I mean, what was the depth of pain that this firefighter was struggling with? Were there signs? Were there symptoms? Were there resources available for him? Was it because of guilt? Was it because of jealousy, anger? All these things add questions. And so we, like I said, we take this data and we try to do the best we can with our 7 different workshops. And what makes us different from any other organization out there, besides the tracking and validating, is that our workshops are 99%. They come straight from our brothers and sisters, from the validation process, from the families, because we know hundreds and hundreds of families, and all these 10 years now of traveling and meeting thousands upon thousands of my brothers and sisters.
I'm curious about the unknown data in that.
Sure.
Could you explain a little bit about that one?
Yes, understand. These have been validated through contacting fire chiefs. Now, please also understand our earliest one that we validated was 1880. And that was a fire chief from Upper New York who was running the New York State Fire Chiefs Conference that year. And unfortunately, the night before the conference opened, due to stress and anxiety, he stepped into a closet and tried to remove his head with a razor blade. And this was validated through the New York Times and the medical examiner reports. 1906, the New Orleans fire chief took his life. So those validation process, about 93, 94% is I have personally spoken to fire chiefs or families or EMS chiefs, where the rest have been validated through death certificates and medical examiner reports. But unknown is the chief, when I contact the chief, they either didn't know the method or didn't feel comfortable enough in telling us. And we don't play in assumptions, so it goes right into the unknown. What I want people to always understand are these are not numbers. These are the faces and names of my brothers and sisters and the families they left behind. And as you can see, it's we hit a high point back in 2016 of 154, and I'm forgive me, but I think we were at like 100 and I think about 115 were firefighters, and the remaining were EMS personnel. And the EMS for us is private ambulance services. And so, but then we look at 2016 there, 111 and 35 or 38 for a total of 149. And then we started seeing the numbers drop down a little. And I thought, oh man, everyone's making progress in the world. There's a lot of peer support teams, there's a lot of departments getting involved in behavioral health. But then we looked at 2019. And we saw that spike jump up to 119 firefighters and 20 EMS. And it shocked me. There's no other word to say it, but I was shocked by it, and it's pretty scary. And with all that we're doing, and I start thinking again these questions. Well, is it because of better reporting? More people know about FBHA, or is it more of our brothers and sisters are struggling? And then for 2020 right now, we're standing at 40, which is 28 firefighters and 12 EMS. I still have 5 to validate for 2020. Overall, I have about 14 that range from 2011 all the way up till 2020 that I still have to validate. But like I said, these are not numbers. These are our brothers and sisters and the families they left behind.
What behaviors are supervisors seeing in firefighters that are not being able to handle the stress?
The number one thing that the chiefs tell me when I call them, I introduce who I am, and I've had 100% compliancy because they know I'll keep it 100% confidential. In 10 years, we have never leaked out any confidential information. If you see names or like last week we did a FBHA chat on Zoom, and it's on Facebook. We had family survivors who talked about it and how they can help other family survivors. So there are many families who stand up and speak, but we do not give out information. We do not give out departments or names. We'll do it by states. And so we had that 100% confidentiality, because if I give that up, then we lose everything. Yeah, but the number one issue they tell us is that they never saw or they never knew those signs and symptoms. And I said, well, please don't beat yourself up, because if you never had the training, how would you know? And also understand that us in the EMS and fire and dispatch world, we are damn good actors. We can hide our emotions and bury them so no one else will see that we're struggling, because we don't want to look weak. But we interviewed over 500. I personally interviewed over 500 of our brothers and sisters and that were struggling with suicidal ideations, depression, and PTSD. And we came up with the top 5 warning signs to look for, and what I call rails, think rails, which is reckless and impulsive behavior. And, I don't believe in guns. You break into my house in Branson, Missouri, you get a Louisville Slugger across the back of your head, I'll be in a stealth mode. You'll never hear me coming. But if I was to walk in the firehouse one morning and say, hey, you know what, I was just over at a gun show and I bought a couple of handguns, what would the questions from my brothers and sisters be? And I asked this, and they say, oh, what kind did you buy? How much did it cost? Are we going shooting? And it's not that, geez, really, Jeff, you've always been against guns. Why the change? What's reckless about that thought pattern? So that was one of them. Anger. Anger is a big one in the fire and EMS world. The things that we see and do, and how people treat each other, how they treat themselves, issues that members have within their own organizations bring out a lot of anger as well. Third one was isolation. When we start isolating ourselves from our loved ones, our brothers and sisters at the station, we're trying to make sure that no one sees that we're struggling. Unfortunately, we start to isolate. The one that really surprised us was number 4, was loss of confidence and skills and abilities. They just were struggling with those issues that I'm not saving people's lives. They're dying in front of me. I'm having all these issues, and they start losing their skills and abilities. And of course, the last one, sleep deprivation. Our schedules, both for volunteer and career in the dispatch, EMS, and fire world, are just absolutely horrific. And our sleep patterns they're gone. And it's very difficult to acquire those into retirement as well.
What barriers to treatment are you seeing in both the county or city supported and the volunteer fire organizations?
I started as a volunteer, so I know exactly what it was. You went on those horrific calls at 4 in the morning and you had to be at your job at 6. Not a lot of resources. Of course, remember, we didn't talk a lot about those things either at that time, but it's still very difficult for a volunteer. The challenges that the chiefs have to, because understand in the fire service, out of 1.1 million or so, over 700,000 are volunteers across the United States, with the remaining being career. So there are a lot of challenges that fire chiefs and EMS personnel that are volunteer EMS ambulance services have to face. One big thing is that most of the time they're working on people that they know within their community. So that's a big issue. Not a lot of counselors in those communities, and training chaplains who might want to be there both as a spiritual guide and someone to listen to is one of the challenges that fire chiefs and EMS directors have to face. So those things were challenges early on. But what's really helped, and I hate to say this, but the virus, in a way, has helped the mental health aspect, because now a telehealth. You can sit in your home and talk to a counselor who understands the EMS or dispatch or fire service, and they might be across the state. And so you could sit at home and have counseling sessions. And so telehealth is probably the main resource that I see that would be very beneficial for volunteer departments if they don't have a lot of counselors in their area. Another great resource is to have counselors outside of your organizations. Employee assistance programs, fabulous programs. They're there for people. But a lot of times the counselors haven't been trained. And so they don't understand the fire service. And a lot of times the firefighters and EMS personnel don't want to go to someone within their organization. They're afraid of confidential reasons. And so we always say, have your resources available. What counselors do you have outside of your organizations? And let me give you an example. If I'm a counselor down the street from one of the fire departments in the Tampa area, and someone comes and sees me, I have no obligation to tell that fire chief anything. My concern is for my client. And that's why I get 7 to 10 calls a week of, looking for counselors. The National Volunteer Fire Council is putting together a national registry of counselors, and FBHA. I've contacted now about 150 counselors across the United States that are working with first responders. And we're putting together a national registry that will be on our webpage coming June 1st. So all these things are coming together. Peer support teams, those have grown immensely. CISM teams, chaplains that understand. So these are the resources that volunteer departments as well as career can use and are very, very beneficial.
What other types of support therapies are there out there for organizations?
I like peer support because they are specifically trained members within your own department or maybe your own county that you can go to. They're on the scene. They see the calls. They can understand it. But word of warning, this is my word of warning. I give it everywhere. If you're on a peer support team or a CISM team, you know what, within your bylaws, it should be that if you're on a team, twice a year, mandatory, you're going to see a counselor. Because the problem is that we always want to give, we forget to take care of ourselves. And so not only are you going on those calls and you have issues in your own personal life, you're absorbing it from your brothers and sisters. So we need to take care of them. So we see peer support teams, CISM teams, but there's a lot of different behaviors as well, therapies, cognitive behavioral therapy, where it's a hands-on, and they bring that problem solving to you, and you work through it together. It's a short term. One of the biggest ones for especially post-traumatic stress disorder is EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it was invented by Dr. Francine Shapiro, who passed away last year in California in 1987, and it's been very successful. It takes a couple months of training for a counselor to go and understand it and how to perform it. When I get calls from my brothers and sisters are struggling with PTSD or trauma, I always look for a counselor that's EMDR certified, and they take you back to that moment, and they use processing through lights or sound, and they make your eyes go back and forth, and it's a way of reprocessing your brain to put what's ever hanging out there, file it where it should go. And like I said, it's I'm not trained in it. I haven't been time because I'm traveling all the time. So that's when you're looking for resources and you want to find a counselor that works with trauma. EMDR is one of the best. And then there's a new thing called brain mapping, where they can look at your brain and see specific parts in specific regions and see how it's been traumatized and how it's affected. So there's a lot of things that are coming on, doing really successful work for our brothers and sisters. And then don't forget chaplains. The spiritual aspect of people find that comfort in the spiritual. So all these things now are coming to the forefront. And what I really love is my brothers and sisters in the counseling world who are dedicating themselves to understand what our world is all about in the fire and EMS world.
But despite the aggressive, proactive approaches of departments to address this issue, some barriers to therapy still remain. These include the first responder didn't feel comfortable talking or reliving the call. Remember that in some people with already underlying mental health issues, reliving the event may be the wrong approach. Support was not accessible. Paid firefighters might be more likely to receive mental health services through their departments than their rural counterparts due to the accessibility and affordability to services. Providers felt discouraged from using the support. This may be due to peer group pressures like feeling of masculinity or being labeled weak after exposing your feelings. Lack of empathy for mental health issues. Speaking out could negatively affect their career advancement, potentially being career destroying. In some police departments, officers who die by suicide do not receive honors. And perception may not reflect reality. Some people being silent about it may be perceived as a negative judgment. These perceptions, though, may be partially built on reality. Shame is a factor in disclosing suicides. As Chief Dill pointed out, there is data on firefighters that only 40% of the firefighters' suicide are represented. A supporting environment of both peers and management can significantly decrease suicide contemplation and attempts. Of some of the therapy options for first responders that were mentioned by Chief Dill, we would like to take the time to briefly go over 5 of the current support or therapy programs that are out there. Now, this is not an endorsement for one over the other, but rather a brief look at what some of those support programs entail. Now, time does not allow us to go into these therapies in depth, but the references that we use to build this episode will be up on our website for your information. It will give you some more in-depth look at what these therapies entail. Now, please keep in mind that when we discuss therapies, it is never a one-size-fits-all approach. Finding the right therapy is individualistic, but do not give up if the first or second attempt doesn't work. It may take a couple attempts at one or finding the one that you are comfortable with. The bottom line is just keep trying. Of the EMS workers that attended, over half found either critical incident stress management type debriefings or EAP sessions to be helpful. About half the people attending these types of sessions, though, stated that it would have been more helpful if the therapist had previous experience within the field. But therapies do work. Employee assistance programs are employer programs that help the employee when they have personal issues that may affect their work. They deal with issues such as workplace stress, drugs and alcohol, and financial issues, just to name a few. Now, critical incident stress debriefing may be part of an employer's employees assistance programs. These programs are provided at little or no cost to the employee by a vendor that has a contract with the company. Critical incident stress management. This is a crisis intervention tool that is meant to prevent psychological harm associated with critical events. The purpose of CISM is to first lessen the impact of a critical incident. Normalize instinctive reactions to an event. Now, this does not mean to minimize your feelings, but it's rather to make your feelings normalized, that It's okay to be disturbed by horrific events. Encourage a natural recovery process. Restore the adaptive functioning of an individual or group. Determine the need for further supportive services or therapy. Now, CISM has 3 stages. The pre-crisis stage is an intervention that includes stress management and stress reduction resistance education. This intervention would most likely be utilized in an event such as a hurricane or a wildfire that is coming. The acute crisis stage intervention starts with the demobilization and consultation stage, which occurs immediately after an incident, and it lasts for about 20 minutes. The goal is to immediately assist individuals in understanding and managing their reactions to an event. Now, a diffusing event is then held after work to have people recount the event details, offer support, give information about potential emotional reactions, and allow individuals to express their concerns. Now, a critical incident stress debriefing occurs 1 to 3 days after the event. Now, the purpose is to provide closure, alleviate distress, and assess the need for further follow-up. Now, there are 7 phases that go into a formal debriefing. Unfortunately, we do not have time to delve into that. Then there's the post-crisis stage intervention, and this is basically a follow-up intervention that assesses the need for any long-term follow-up due to an acute event. Then there's peer-to-peer training, and this is just what it sounds. These are dedicated people on the staff that you can approach in a critical event, or they may come to talk to you about how you are doing after an event. They act as resource people to help you when you need to vent to somebody. The International Firefighters Association have a link on their website as to how you can set up a peer-to-peer group training, and you can find that on our website as well. Resiliency training. This is a process that trains your brain to overcome adversity through positive adaptation. They believe that resiliency trait lies within all of us and can be harnessed and strengthened. It does this by training your attention and awareness. Resiliency training can help encourage you to take control of your life, develop a good self-esteem, develop the sense of believing you can do what you set your mind to, developing a self-awareness and controlling your emotions, developing optimism and hope and gratitude, and the ability to set realistic and measurable goals, develop a flexible attitude, and develop a positive and optimistic attitude. Resiliency training can help enhance productivity, allow for smoother organizational change, and have a more adaptive response to stress. And then finally, there's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. This is something that Chief Dill talked about earlier. Now, this was introduced in 1987, and the theory goes something like this. Now, you process and learn about the world through your eyes. And when something happens to you, this part of this process involves vision. It sends these memories to your brain, and then your brain acts like a filing cabinet and stores these moments. If you encounter something that you have not seen before, your brain goes into that filing cabinet and looks for past similar episodes for you to use as a reference to base your current decision making. Now, let's say you broke your leg at age 4 while riding a bike. Now, this can go a couple different ways. Some will process this as just an accident. The leg will heal, you will get back on the bike, and although the first or second time may make you a little anxious, nothing else happens. You'll gradually learn that it was just an accident and you'll move on. You've reconciled it. Now, your brain has built and stored these memories, so each time you think about getting on a bike, you will reprocess these memories and the emotions, and those emotions will come up. And if you were unable to reconcile that it was just an accident, your brain builds a cabinet for that as well. So the next time you think about getting on the bike, you may start to panic. You may not get on the bike at all. Your brain has gone to the cabinet of bad memories and dredged up those emotions. So what the EMR model does It takes you back to the moment of the incident and tries to redirect your brain from going to the bad cabinet, and instead goes to a cabinet that you can reconstruct something that makes you able to reconcile the event with as little stress as possible. Finally, it is important for you to know that there are certain signs that may alert you when a person is thinking about committing suicide. The warning signs of somebody that may be contemplating suicide include excessive sadness or moodiness, a sudden calmness, which is important because they've finally resolved themselves to the act, withdrawal, changes in personality and or appearance, dangerous or self-harmful behavior, recent trauma or life crisis, making preparations such as giving away things or making funeral arrangements or writing letters to people that they haven't talked to in a long time, and threatening suicide. Now, it's important when you see these signs that you go ahead and address them with the person. People who receive support from caring friends and family and who have access to mental health service are less likely to act on their suicidal impulses than those who are isolated from sources of care and support. And that's an important concept because once they know that somebody is out there and caring for them, it just may bring them back from the brink.